Okay, so now that we've got all of our channels coming in and everything's in the right spot, now it's time to actually talk about organization for your workflow when it comes to how you want to think and see everything in front of you. So in analog world, that would have just been, well, you are kind of stuck in the order you put it in, and there's no going around that. You can't move things around. You can't group things other than through DCAs or any kind of grouping. And even then, it's just kind of wherever it ends up being. You can't physically move things around. In digital, however, we can actually put things where we want them in an order that makes sense to us. So how I think about everything is I like to keep my band separate from my vocals, and I want to keep things grouped together in terms of how I kind of prioritize processing them and focusing on them. So for me, my first thing is always going to be the drum kit. I have the drum kit first thing. Kick in is always my first channel, and that's because I focus on the drums first as I build my mix. From then on, I'll start introducing stringed instruments like bass guitar, electric guitar, acoustic guitar. I'll bring in my keys, my pads after that, anything else that I may have for the weekend, some tracks, maybe some stringed instruments, whatever. And then after that, my vocals come into play, and it's because I want my vocals to be able to be on top of everything, and I'm going to probably have them on their own little area on my board that I can think about focusing on during the mix while I'm having everything else in front of me. So let's look at the board here, and I've actually got a copy of the channels on my iPad here so you can see them even better. And I've basically laid everything out already. I've got my drum kit in order of how I mix it first, which is going to be my kick in, my kick out, my snare top, and my snare bottom. And those 4 channels are the ones I probably have my fingers on the most out of everything besides my vocals. And that's because for me, I'm constantly checking the levels of those because my drummers are always going to be playing it in different levels depending on the song and how the feel of it needs to be. I also use the combination of the 2 microphones on each shell, whether it's the kick in and out or the snare top and bottom, to kind of blend and choose the sound I'm going for. So, and we'll talk more about that when we start mixing drums, but that's always the first things that are always up in front of me. And I always know that they're there because they're always my first 4 channels. And then I've got things like toms, I've got my overhead, I've got my hat microphone, I've also got my SPDX. Now this one is interesting because it's actually a later channel on my board. I actually plan it to be kind of towards the end because not every time do I have an SPDX with my drummer. And the SPDX, by the way, are those little drum pads. So I actually put that towards the end of my channel patch because I don't always have it. So on my board, I actually bring it up next to the drums. And I even label it the same color because I want to have it near everything and be in that kind of group, in that category. So for me, that makes sense. For others, it may not be. So it may make sense for you to have it somewhere else, more like near your tracks. If maybe you have a percussion channel as well from your tracks, it may make more sense to have it over next to that because they're all kind of similar style of sound. Next, I've got my bass guitar, my acoustic, my electric. My electric actually here is a stereo, and the cool thing about this board is it actually makes it one single fader. Even though it's 2 channels, it automatically bundles it into 1 channel. Same with my keys and my pads. Those are also stereo. Then after that, I've got my vocals. I got my 3 vocals here, and I group them together. And then I've got my vocal verb, vocal delay, drum verb, and my auxiliary verb, which is kind of just my catch-all for any other instruments that may need it. Usually this is my acoustic reverb if I want to have some of that, but I may throw other instruments into that bus as well for some reverb just in case they need it. Sometimes the piano's a little too dry for me and I need to add a little touch of reverb to it, or if we have a stringed instrument for the weekend like a violin or a cello, I may add some reverb to that, so I'll send that to this verb. Now on this console, again, I can put anything anywhere. In fact, I can put things in multiple places at once. I can have them all on different layers. I can have just however I want to lay it out. It's all available to me. So the way I like to lay it out is this. I like to keep a channel bank where my first layer is basically everything in order. That's usually what I do, is I have everything from channel 1 through 48 in order available to me that I'm going to have. Then I like to have my live tab, which is usually my worship tab. It's usually what's happening during the worship team that I need to have focus on. So I don't have any of my handhelds or my lav microphones. I don't have any of the microphones for, say, my room mics, so I don't need to focus on that. I don't have click. I don't have talkbacks in there. Those are all on their own layer where I can get to those when I need to, but I keep it empty and off my main worship layer so that way I can focus on just what's in front of me. And I usually lay it out in a way that I can always have access to the things I need most there. Some instruments I may not even touch again after I sound check them, so I may tuck them into a different layer. And then I'll usually have my talking or my speaker or pastor setting, which is another layer that just has usually the handheld microphones, the lavalier microphone. And then I usually have my Mac or my Pro Presenter feed in there, because that's usually where I will have it most be interacted with. And then lastly, I'll usually keep a band bus and vocal bus on that layer as well. So I can, if the band say comes back up to play a song, or there's a moment where they're going to lead after the message or something, I have it right there available to me to unmute them and adjust them as a whole, the levels of the band, so I can mix that with whoever's speaking. So this is just an example of how you can go about laying out your console for you. I recommend taking the time to figure out what things that you focus on most and put those up front or in places that make sense to you to have at all times. If you're like me, you may even have multiple layers with the same stuff in the same spot, but then other sides of the board actually change to fit what you need there. So some people like to have the drums always up and then different instruments on the other side of their board, or whatever they need to focus on. That way they can always have access to their drums at all times. Whatever makes sense to you and what you find yourself gravitating towards touching the most, have those up in front of you as much as you can. The rest of them, set them up in a way that makes sense and is easy to find, because you want to be able to be efficient and quick when things need to change. You don't want to be going through all your layers and trying to find where that one microphone is feeding back, because, oh, I know that acoustic likes to feed back because the acoustic player hasn't gotten a feedback buster yet, even though I've told him 12 times. That happens. So make sure you know exactly where that fader is at all times. And if it's something that you need to keep up with at all times, put it in a place that it's always available to you. The whole idea here is just to be efficient and organized in a way that you can find things quickly, and you know where they are at all times, and you can get to them and make adjustments as quickly as possible without having to think too much about it.